first I gotta dispel some rumors. So one, I don't know if anyone caught the news, but India was thinking about changing their name to my name. Right? It was yesterday. I didn't have anything to do with it. My generative AI skills were strong, not quite that strong yet. But anyway, my name is Bharat Patel. I am the product lead for Project Linchpin. I'll do a quick what is that in a few seconds. But so going back to India, they're really thinking about changing their name. The name actually stands for Bharat. Bharat is motherland. And again, my first grade teacher, I born in Chicago, moved around a lot, landed in New Jersey, sitting there with my head down. Teacher goes, Bharat Patel. Bharat Patel. That is me. So again, that's my name, Bharat Patel. Happy to say Bharat or Bharat for whatever reason. So now, let me give you an analogy. I'm really bad at analogies, so I'm going to apologize in advance. Tortoise and the hare. Tortoise and the hare? Hare and the tortoise. Which one, as it is applied to AI, which one do you think industry is, and which one do you think the DoD is?
Trick question.
Okay, so again, not the greatest analogy, but
Wow.
Industry, you guys haven't solved. You guys have been doing this for a long time. You guys are not as obnoxious as the hare, but some industry partners are, right? I'm trying to figure out how to create this ecosystem within Project Linchpin to take advantage of all the capabilities that you have to offer. We're going to start slowly rolling out contracts to allow us to create that ecosystem to really meet the needs of the Army and the PEO. Again, more to follow on that. But why is the DoD considered the hare? It's not because the technology's not there. We've been doing AI for, 1950s, DARPA. With the advancements in hardware computing environments, yes, we are now able to bring this capability to soldiers. But again, it's not the technology. The challenges that we face are with, you've heard it before, trust. How do we verify things? Where do we do AI? Do we do it at the enterprise level? Do we do it at the tactical edge? Everything in between, right? What are the standards? What are the process? How do we govern AI across the battle space? These are some of the challenges that we are trying to face, and eventually the hare is going to slow down, tortoise is going to catch up, and we are so close to that finish line. And I want to talk to these gentlemen about what they're doing and how we're going to come together as a DoD to really get us past the finish line, but I also want to make it super interactive. So with that, I am going to ask people to start thinking about questions. But if you don't have questions, I no doubt some of you will think of something to say and ask. We want to keep this going. We want to keep the dialogue going. I see you with the headphones. That is yours. So with that, I'm going to allow these fine gentlemen and my partners to introduce themselves, plus say a couple things about what you do and why you guys are great at what you do.
Great, thanks, Bharat. So I'm Colonel Matt Strohmeyer. I go by Nomad. I work up at OSD at the new Chief Digital and AI Office, which is a new PSA that reports to DepSecDef. I am responsible for the Global Information Dominance Series of Experiments, or GIDE, which are now DepSecDef-sponsored series, the goal of which is to be the experimentation vehicle, very different than normal exercises, experimentation vehicle to iteratively learn and field JADC2, or Combined Joint All-Domain Command and Control, across the Joint Force. We're focused on a couple key mission threads, which I can get into later, but we are on path to begin delivery of initial MVP capability by the end of this year. We're working very closely with combatant commands, with with the Joint Staff, and then also with a couple of key edge capabilities and edge units that are also exploring those spaces. So really glad to be here to provide that perspective.
Yeah, cool. Sek Chai, I'm CTO and co-founder for Latent AI. What we do is we build products to optimize the AI for the technical edge. What that means is models that have been running on the cloud, we want to shrink them down, we want to make sure that they run on a embedded device. These are battery powered, swap constraint, those kind of things. So we build a tool for different services in DoD. We actually engage with the Navy right now, working on the water emissions, right? So we also have other things in the Army and SOCOM as well. We have a booth, so stop by and take a look.
Hey, good afternoon. Excuse me, Charles Yetman, so Navy civilian. My primary role is I'm the AI lead for Project Overmatch. So if you're not familiar with Project Overmatch, this will really help. It's the naval contribution to JADC2. So if that means something to you, great. If not, I've seen you have my tail. And I guess primarily what I'm focused on is how do we build out that foundational infrastructure to support MLOps so that we can deploy machine learning or other AI algorithms to the edge. I don't know if tactical edge or not. I'll talk about that. Perhaps if I get a question on it. But how do we deploy those at speed and scale? And how are we able to monitor the health and status of those models when they're in a disconnected tactical environment?
Yeah, Eric Syphard, Booz, Vice President in our Chief Technology Office. In this role, I spent most of my time leading our AI engineering, research, and development, mostly focused on defense and public sector. I also advised the firm on venture investments and commercial technology integration. So hopefully what I'll provide to the panel today is some perspective on how to work with industry and government and how we can make great things happen when we collaborate.
All right, back over to me. So first question, I want to really talk about experimentation and how we really try to get after learning objectives, plus how do we operationalize AI and Nomad. I wanted to get your thoughts on everything.
Thanks, Bharat. So in the context of experimentation and how we get capabilities like AI and supporting capabilities out to the warfighter, the department has begun to take a different approach to what we've done in the past. We've talked about JADC2. We often talked about it as a noun in the past, as a thing we could buy maybe, and we've moved quite beyond that now. Over the course of the last couple of years, our thoughts on JADC2 in general, now CJADC2, have evolved to the point where we realize that it's certainly not a thing you can buy. It's essentially a way of approaching joint warfighting. It's a way of doing things differently than what we've done in the past. And one of the key foundational things when it comes to fielding JADC2 that we are shifting is the way that we go about doing that. Normally, we approach building capabilities for the department or working with industry based on we create a requirement. We codify a requirement document. It takes us a couple of years to do that. We go through a very laborious process, an important process to do that. We then throw that requirement document over the wall to industry, and then industry turns on it for a while and comes back with a capability maybe a couple of years later. And that process works really well in the hardware space. It continues to work well, I think, in the hardware space. But when it comes to AI, data, and software in the space that we are in with CJADC2, we believe that we need to take a different approach. And so we started that early this year with the deputy-sponsored GIDE 5, the first experiment that was up at the OSD level, and asked us and our team up at CDAO to gather together the combatant commands, the joint staff, and a couple key tactical level units and bring them together and take a different approach, to take an experimentation approach to try to learn what do we need when it comes to CJADC2 and how can we field those capabilities differently than how we would field a normal hardware capability, for example. And there's certainly hardware components of what we're doing. And so in the process of doing that, she asked us to focus on rather than saying, oh, we're going to first focus on how can we field AI, or first focus on, there's a capability out there, how can we bring this capability in the field? Instead, we started with warfighting missions that we have, both missions that exist today at the strategic level, for example, the ability for the combatant commands to be able to not only see what's going on in their theater from a global, from an awareness perspective, but to see how potential adversaries in their theater are operating globally. So that there may be an adversary that has interests in Africa, or has interests in the Middle East, or has interests in South America. Right now, or in the past, we often approached that adversary from a very regional perspective, and the ways that we might develop deterrence responses were from a very regional perspective. And so what she asked us to do is to take a much more global approach to that, and to think about when it comes to the war-fighting ways that we're getting after fielding all these capabilities, to think about it from a global integration perspective. And so that was one of the first things that she said that she wanted us to focus the GIDE series of experiments on. The second thing that she wanted us to focus them on was an ability to think about how we close kill chains, and how we close kill chains not in the ways we've done it in the past, which are very much human-centric, and humans are always going to be the ones that are making the decisions when it comes to those kill chains. We're very much behind the responsible use of AI. But in the past, we would describe the kill chain closures as not just human in the loop, but really human is the loop. When the way that we gather information, the way that we track targets, the way that we collate that data together, and then the way that we translate that data to a decision maker to be able to pair it with a weapon, or pair it with an effector, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic. And in the past, the traditional way is that it's not just been human in the loop, it's been human literally is the loop. They literally pick up the phone, they make the phone calls, they collate the Excel information together in a way that eventually results in, yes, the closure of kill chains in a way that only we can all do by working together, but it does it in a way that doesn't reach the decision advantage that we know that we need to maintain for us to have the advantage against our adversaries in the future. And so when it came to theater level kill chains, we are looking at how do we not only try and go from being human is the loop kill chains, but to human in the loop, and then eventually human on the loop kill chains, allowing us to be able to, in a responsible way, in a way that we can have measured confidence in the capabilities, but to allow data and aggregations of data and algorithms, and maybe someday eventually AI, to allow us to be able to do those things better and faster than what we do today. And so we focused on those two kind of broad areas of application, and we went out in the field and used an experimentation approach. What does that mean, an experimentation approach? Well, if you're normally operating up at the Department of Defense level, failure is not something we talk about very often. Failure is something to be avoided at all costs, almost usually, especially if you're used to many of the traditional exercises that the department runs on a regular basis. The goal in that exercise is usually for the commander or whoever is operating inside that exercise to perfectly perform and to really make no area of failure at all in what they're doing. She asked us to take a very different approach. She actually said, Nomad, I want you to tell me all the points that you failed at, because if you didn't fail, that means you didn't push hard enough in delivering the warfighting capabilities that we need as we bring together data, as we bring together eventually AI and those capabilities. It was a very freeing thing to have the deputy tell you that they're actually looking for us to apply that kind of approach to experimentation. She also then said, I want you to do it really, really quickly. I expect an initial capability to be rolled out by the end of the year, and I want you to conduct 4 GIDE experiments, and your first one needs to be in 30 days. That was done around January 1st. So we did that. We conducted GIDE 5 at the end of January. We just finished GIDE 6. It was an 8-week-long experiment in the June-July timeframe, and then GIDE 7 starts next week. And we're going to be going through the process of iterative experimentation as we go through that. We're fielding software capabilities, we're conducting data integrations, and eventually we're getting to the point where we can start applying AI to help us learn how to gather information better, how to make better decisions in what we're doing. But that experimentation approach has been really important for us at the Joint Force level, and we're starting to learn the value of it, and that we're seeing a lot of examples about how when you move out of the boardroom and you move onto the battlefield, when you move away from briefing sheets and move out to actual demos of capability, is where you learn where there are gaps, where the data isn't connected, where there's issues in how the data was transformed, where there's issues in how the eventual tactical executor would see that data presented to them. So that experimentation approach has been really important for what we're doing up at the Joint Staff level now and the Joint Force level at OSD, and one that I think is very useful for this group to think about how, as you continue to work with the Department of Defense, willingness, and now the department's willingness to apply that same kind of approach to what you're doing in ways that I think you already think that way. We are starting to not think that way as well, and we're very open and interested in working with industry partners to apply that approach.
That was great. So just to expand on a couple of things there. Failure is an option. So going back to hallucination, right? We talked about, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Maybe it is a good thing because then we can figure out how to correct it. So maybe, you know, there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to AI because we're still trying to figure things out. And it's okay. It's okay for us to learn. Off to the next topic. So I'm a program, right? I'm a program. One of my objectives in life is to create opportunities for industry to engage in the acquisition process for SEC. What are your thoughts on trying to get involved into the acquisition process, into the game? What are some things that you've learned, and what are some thoughts that you share with the audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Latent AI is an early startup, right? Only a few years old. But we've done quite a number of things to get engaged and to kind of work with the DoD. Just to add to what Nomad's saying, iterate fast, but learn from the iteration. I think it's better to make sure we learn from our mistakes early on before conflict happens, right? Because at that time it's a little bit too late. So you need to know what failure means and adapt. And adaptation in terms of how we deploy systems, that's going to be the key to winning any conflict, right? That you're not standing still in terms of what your capability will have, right? So agree on that. From a startup kind of perspective, working with DoD, quite a number of challenges, right? I think for folks in the Silicon Valley or kind of startup kind of ecosystem, they have a different kind of vernacular, right? They talk about different things, right? They might build the fastest thing, the best kind of interesting models, like you said, LLMs and things, and they go right like the hare rather than the tortoise. But you're not sure where they're heading, and they have a different terminology, right? They may be creating the best LLM to create poetry and things like that, but that might not be of interest to DoD from a certain perspective, right? That's not exactly what you need. So my advice to a lot of startups, small businesses, really to engage and really talk to the different services, because there's different needs within the DoD, and you really got to talk to the end customer to know exactly what is and tailor to it, right? You know, LLM that gives you the best poetry today is probably not what we need, but there's certain features and capabilities from the generative AI that you can use. So that'll be one. But we also engage with other entities. For example, we've written a joint article on the Atlantic Council on how JADC2 could leverage industry in terms of a hierarchy of these, what we call edge continuum. So we also say, no, we understand what we have from the industry perspective and how that could influence DoD, right? So many different ways, I think, but really is, you know, getting out of your comfortable zone, right? Talk and engage with the partners that we have, Navy, Air Force, and such, to understand what they're requiring.
Okay, no, thanks for that. I'm gonna, next question will be for Charles. So this might be one of the hardest questions. It's something that, you know, it's just very hard to describe. So edge, right? What are your thoughts on edge? And whatever you say will be the definition from here on out. So just be
No pressure, Charles.
Yeah, it depends. So one thing I wanted to say, with respect to what Seth was talking about, is there anyone from DIU here? Defense Innovation Unit? No? Okay, I was going to throw them under the bus and tell you what we're going to talk about, but that would be my recommendation if you're trying to kind of break into the space. Go have a look at DIU and their commercial solutions opening. In terms of edge, so I'm Navy. I'm a Navy civilian. I never raised my right hand, but you know, I've been in that world for about 20 years. You know, kind of speak that language, and I think when you talk about edge from a Navy perspective, you know, we have slightly different requirements than the other services. So whether we're talking about you know, a MOC, a Maritime Operations Center, could that be edge? Like, no, not really. Is it a carrier strike group staff on a CBN? Well, that maybe, or it could be you know, could it be a crew des or a small boy? Or is it a you know, medium-sized underwater unmanned vehicle? So I think it depends, but I think one thing from an Overmatch perspective, what we're looking at is I kind of see the world through two lenses. There's a development component that supports the CI, continuous integration, and then there's an operational architecture which supports the CD piece. So that one of the other speakers talked about CI/CD. So I think we need to look at, how do we develop capability that is flexible and can be deployed to different environments from an edge perspective, right? That's different spot profiles. That's different. Different use cases. Maybe you're willing to take a model that doesn't perform quite as well as another model in a certain instance. So it all depends on how it's being employed and what the requirements look like. The use case that we partnered with DIU and NIWC to look at marketing team programs and medium-sized UUV. They have a mission to go out and do mind countermeasure. So what they do is they send the UUV out. It has some autonomy. It runs a lawnmower pattern. It has side scan sonar data. It collects that data. And then, on the newer versions, they have an ATR model that's actually deployed on the vehicle on a Jetson NVIDIA GPU. It'll make calls to say, hey, I think I saw an object of interest. It's at this coordinate. Here's a high resolution image of it. And then an operator, when they do the post-mission analysis, can be guided by that ATR. So instead of someone sitting in front of a monitor and watching a 15-hour playback, they can say, go here, go here, go here, go there, and then they can put a diagram on that target or whatever the case may be. The value proposition that we're looking at is how do we update that model and redeploy it to the edge in a time frame that's better than 12 to 18 months, which is sort of definitely not the industry standard, but the Navy standard today for this program. So, working with DIU, we went out to commercial industry. We said, hey, commercial industry, you're doing a lot of work around MLOps. Do you have any tools that we could, integrate and deploy into our environment to satisfy this use case? I think the timing in which it took to put a solicitation out of the street to actually get prototype OT contracts awarded was faster than what I'm used to. Being a longtime Navy person doing FAR-based contracts, and then working through some of those challenges of these companies are primarily like Series A, Series B startups. So you call and go like, well, who's your FSO, or like how many of your employees have CAT cards, and they just look at you like, what are you talking about? So the government has to be flexible. We have to do things differently. So we provisioned an IL2 environment, commercial AWS environment. We said, stand your software up, and then deliver us containerized software that comprises your solution, and deliver us Terraform infrastructure as code scripts so that we can lift and ship that software into the government environment that you might not have access to. So I think there's a lot of challenges on the development side, on the operational deployed side as well. I think we need the ability to do edge monitoring of these models, right? So invariably, as soon as we deploy a model to the edge, it's going to encounter data that's not representative of its training set. That's just I think a fact for us. So how do we alert a user and say like, hey, this model is seeing a lot of out-of-distribution events, or it's drifting, something needs to be done to kick off a retraining job. We need to opportunistically exfil the data that we care about, not the 99% that the model classified just fine, but the data that drove that anomalous behavior. How do we get that in the hands of someone who can retrain a model and push that back out? So that's primarily what we're focused on. A lot of the other challenges I think other speakers have talked about: technical debt, acquisition. Technical debt's a big one for the Navy. Any sensor system on a ship that belongs to a program of record, they don't necessarily have a requirement to make data available from machine learning models. They have a requirement to display that data in a static CRT monitor in some section of the ship, right? So yeah, I'm not sure. I think we'll talk for a while, so I'll stop.
Great. So we'll move over to Eric as a systems integrator. Can you share some perspectives in the AI tech space?
Yeah, happy to. I think that being an integrator it's a great job. So I spent a lot of time working with great commercial companies, many are represented here today, and the government, Nomad, Charles, other Bharat, the Army side, other services on how to tackle this AI problem. And I think what's particularly neat about AI is for it to work well, it really requires the integration of many technologies across different places of operation, right? So just a couple examples. On one hand, there's technology that is designed for building artificial intelligence. Enterprise compute, commercial data, machine learning training platforms. This is tech for engineers, right? Another place we need technology is for technology that runs AI in deployment, right? These are runtime environments for latent AI and embedded hardware at the edge, trained LLMs, many different examples. These are technologies that are relied on by our analysts, by our warfighters, two totally different user environments. And then third, and perhaps most importantly, I think it's what Charles is going to hit at, there's a bucket of technologies that is supposed to connect it to. This is where we kind of land with ML operations. If you want to bring the trustworthiness of artificial intelligence, we got to find ways to deploy models frequently so that the end users that are receiving can rely on them. It's a really tough job, particularly at the edge. And so, the secret in all this, and no surprises, is how we integrate this stuff. So that's not a novel concept, but I do think there's interesting challenges that are presenting some new obstacles, novel obstacles. The first that we're seeing is that, and the rate of innovation is just crazy, right? A lot of the panels and earlier today talked about that. So from a DoD perspective, an integrator perspective, we got to start thinking differently about the approaches we use to recognize and integrate tech at that pace. At least fail fast, right? We think a lot about just what we see in supervised training this year, the impact it had on data labeling. That's like 12 months of disruption, just like that. The next big theme I think we're observing pretty consistently is there's great spikes in specialization. So the Swiss Army knife days of having a couple AI technologies that do everything well, they are over. We're seeing breakthroughs in innovation at much lower levels and much smaller degrees of modularity inside of technology stacks. And so we've got to figure out how we recognize those things and integrate, again, more agilely at lower levels. And I think the third trend that is, I think, really surprising, you look no further than we've seen generative this year, is we're almost seeing this reversal of system engineering, right? Where now models, software, and infrastructure really have to be considered together. Where we spent decades trying to separate them apart. And so now, particularly with LLMs, high compute workloads, you got to think about infrastructure as part of the design of these things. And so these are all things that I think are presenting challenges to us operationalizing these capabilities. When I think about kind of some guideposts to how to organize this stuff, one way could be looking at it in several different connected layers. So for military applications and AI at the edge, you have your mission applications, usually provided by an OEM. Inside of there, you have models, pipelines, platforms, and infrastructure. There's lots of ways to slice this. This is one construct. And so I think in that framework, the area that's most exciting to us is really the pipeline space. So this is this place where we can actually abstract some of the decision advantage, create decision advantage and work just the same, and it's independent of individual technologies. It's really what Charles was saying, Nomad, Second, and others. It's a common theme. So when we think about technology, some of the things that we prioritize to achieve that are things like infrastructure as code, templated software, a heavy focus on orchestration technologies that work not just in enterprise, but also on still environments and networks. So we gain this nimbleness and this ability to deploy with a lot of speed and frequency.
Are any of those experiments available to be shared with industry now that they're done? So that if industry were to have been a participant, we could have showed you what we could have been doing for you so that you can compare it to what you've already done in case we can help you fail fast.
Absolutely. No, we are absolutely open to really sharing what we've done with industry across the board so far. We've had several different vendors across the different things that we are doing. We have vendors in the application space, vendors in the transport space, vendors in the security space, networking. It's mainly focused on applications, but there's other spaces as well, and we're very open. Please reach out to me, and we can get you connected with our acquisition community, or we're just very open to discuss it in general as well. So happy that we have a private-public partnership established that we can, takes us about 10 days for the experimentation, getting somebody on contract to help us if it helps to advance those capabilities.
Charles, do you have any similar questions? So, are there lessons learned or pain points from your exercise that you could offer up to industry?
In terms of like how to get engaged, or
Well, in terms of what are some things that you're seeing as gaps or some opportunities where industry could focus their tech or their IRAD or anything like that?
yeah, I mean, from an Overmatch perspective, I think we, Admiral Small did some industry days and went out and be like, even I think classified industry day and said like, here's sort of the technologies that we're focused on and problems that we need help with. So I think, certainly in our case, the classified session is probably much more useful than the class like, what is JADC2. So I think that's it. I don't know if he's going to come back around and do more of those, but that was a good opportunity, I think, to learn. I'm not super familiar with SBIRs. I know that's been talked about today, but that's probably somewhere else to look. We did an ANTEX event, Advanced Enabled Technology Experimentation. We actually did one where we provisioned an AWS environment, gave vendors access to go do some work with machine learning today. Typically those events are like vendors show up with hardware, they go run some things around, and it's not really as well integrated. So I think that this whole concept of like digital integration environment can help support some of that. So that might be something to look for in FY24 as well from an OM standpoint.
Okay, Seth.
I would challenge the industry to publish themselves, right? The point here is if you wait for government to tell you this is the way to go, that's probably too late, right? I would be more proactive and say, hey, this is how I'm doing it. Maybe, government take a look, because there might be something interesting here. And then you're pushing, what your new capability might be. As industry, if we're iterating faster, I would go up there and tell, hey, Nomad, think about this way. Rather than wait for the government to, clear everything, and by the time you get it, it's probably decades old. You're probably old already, right, by that time.
You're looking at me, but my counter to that is we don't always know the use cases that are going to resonate. And if I'm showing oil and gas or smart campus capabilities, it may not resonate. I can make it resonate, but it's just the vocabulary disconnects me.
Understood, but I think that there is, you do want to make the connect, right? And I would challenge all of us to be more proactive. Otherwise, I think everybody's in the way, kind of stall.
And I'll just add that, again, being a firm, there's always this weird tension between industry and acquisition as they're trying to write their RFIs and RFPs. They're like, how much information can I share? If I share it with you, I need to share it with all the 1,000 other people that are interested in doing it. But I think this AI space, just because we don't exactly know where we're going, we need input. So we have an open door policy within Project Linchpin. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to figure out what tech we should be looking at. So you guys are really informing. We're throwing out RFIs. There's a couple more coming. So we need input as we kind of move this forward.
Colonel, could you explain the process for how vendors are considered for these GIDE experiments in the first place? I know I'm kind of taking off on the previous question on how the results of previous experiments could be offered up to industry, but how does industry approach you all to say, consider that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the reasons that I'm here is to try to get that message out. We've had an industry day, CDAO ran an industry day, I think 3 months ago. There was both a classified and unclassified version of that. We're going to be doing another one of those coming up in a few more months. and then there's going to be a couple open solicitations coming up for specific capabilities. If it's helpful, the things that want to delineate a little bit between the services that are represented here and then the joint level that's represented by OSD and what we are looking at. We are at OSD and the joint force level. We are not trying to get into service business. We believe they're doing a very good job at what they're doing to build out their JADC2 capabilities. What OSD is trying to do is to provide the means for data integration, software integration, and applications to bring those service level functions together in a joint efficient way. So for example, if there are kill chains that we need to close, rather than the services having to do a very good job within their service remit to connect their sensor systems and capabilities, which is great, we are trying to allow them to be able to connect to the other services as well, and to connect to the rest of the joint force and the combatant commands that would be in the JTF level that would be directing how those things would be employed. So that's one of the differences in what we're doing. Some of the specific areas that we are rapidly trying to iterate and develop capabilities is in the data integration front, and being able to integrate data, not just data itself, but integrate data that serves workflows and integrate workflows across J2 intelligence, J3 operations, J4 logistics, J5 planning spaces at the combatant command level and the joint staff, and allow us to be able to make decisions better and faster than what our adversaries can, and then to be able to also do that at the theater kill chain level. That's one of the areas that we're really focused on right now, if that helps.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you. So you got Linchpin, Overmatch, GIDE, probably 2 others out there. How much overlap in the vendor community are you guys seeing across the services based on who's doing what and stuff? You're welcome.
So that's a great question. I think, I think the role of who's doing what to whom from an OSD services, CDAO standing up, that to me, that's not abundantly clear. I heard Nomad tracking what he said. I think from an ML ops perspective, so the Navy, we went out and did, this solicitation with DIU, we procured these tools, we stood them up in an IL5 environment. What I would like to do is share those, share what we found out, give access to that tooling, see does it make sense for other folks. So I think we're going to talk here shortly. I talked with the Spec Corps folks. In a perfect world, I'd like to give these things over to a CDAO and say, hey, please help me scale these as an enterprise solution, if in fact they're best of breed for other services and for the enterprise. So I think that's always hard in terms of each service is a little bit different, but the service, at least the Navy from a service perspective, I don't know how, but it has a mandate of resourcing to deploy an MLOps framework that supports the enterprise. I think that falls more, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think that falls more, sort of the OSD CDAO. So hopefully that was something helpful.
Do you want to add? I was going to add. So I think some overlap is good, because I'm not going to depend on Charles to learn on my behalf, so I got to fail too. But we're all not going to be able to afford to actually sustain this, so eventually we're going to have to converge. So just for Project Linchpin, officially kind of initiated last November. We're going to enter the software planning phase no later than December. As part of that, since November, met with over 170 companies, two RFIs, met with about 15 DoD organizations from the IC to the Navy, Air Force, NRO, NSA, trying to figure out who's doing what, so then we could build a strategy over the next 2 years to figure out how we as a DoD come together to share some resources, because again, we can't all afford to do this over and over. So that's going to be like the linchpin strategy. Is going to rely on a lot of the stuff that's already available within the DoD and the stuff that is already on contract. But then in like FY26, you might see some unique requirements that the Army needs to accomplish on its own. So those are some things that we're going to start going after.
Hey, Bharat, if I can add maybe a little other perspective to that one, because it's a great question. I think it's also picked up in Roman Matt's opening comments on like the human loop. All these technologies are fantastic, but for each of the services and joint level, it's working backward from the mission and backward from that end user that makes them valuable in operations. And there's a lot of differences in that space. Data modalities, requirements on latency, power consumption, DIL environments, enterprise to edge. There's so many nuances to solving that, where it's just really hard. Even if you have the same company logos working to solve the problem, there's so much fine-tuning and tailoring that's required that I think this is a challenge we're all collectively working towards.
Other questions?
I guess you can ask questions. Okay, this will actually to both of you guys. So I know you guys work on a joint and so forth, the services. Have you guys taken consideration coalition, UK, Australian? It came up last week, that's why I'm asking. The UK was asking for a joint environment, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually ran GIDE6 for about 4 days from Northwoods in London. The UK was a strong participant in GIDE6. It was our initial foray into what cross-combatant command and coalition collaborative planning would look like, and we were in a common collaborative space with the UK, with several US combatant commands, and we were learning, we don't have any real doctrine for how to do this. Like, now that we can actually see each other's data. We also discovered a lot of data challenges. When we did that, we had classification challenges because we've just blanket overclassified some things, rather than thinking about how we can do it in a more nuanced way. So we are very invested in trying to bring in our 5i partners and other partners into what we're doing inside of GIDE. And I can't speak for the services, but I imagine it's
Yes. Long story short, we had the UK over the summer. We go there. There's active dialogue. Same with the Aussies. So we're starting to partner from a machine learning perspective. They're in the same boat. They have even smaller budgets for machine learning, so they're trying to figure out what infrastructure that they could kind of just jump on.
So, from the government perspective, where do you see the industry leading in AI deployments, and where do you see the government leading? The hare versus tortoise.
You're going for me first? Okay. So my goal is to maximize commercial technologies and not really duplicate. So in areas where, so I've done market research, a ton of market research, so some areas where I haven't seen as much investments on the industry side, things like adversarial AI, Trojan management and detection. Those are some areas where I would spend government funds in order to fill some industry gaps. But our goal is to not really duplicate what I can just get AI services for.
All three of you.
Okay. Did you want to go first?
Sure. So I would say that very much share what Bharat said, that perspective that we are trying to maximize our strategic advantage, which is the best commercial industrial base in the world, to be able to do this well and not believe that we can solve it on our own. So that's what we're trying to enable. I think we would see that one of our key roles is trying to integrate, not integrate from a technology perspective, but integrate from like a program perspective, a lot of those great commercial capabilities, but then also make sure that we are adhering to responsible use of AI, the way that we are building up these capabilities, and try to provide that level of oversight, but then just let the best commercial companies in the world run to be able to do that. That's kind of our perspective on what we're trying to do.
So just one kind of comment on that. I think one area, when we did the in-person pitches for Project Ammo for the MLOps tools, asked the industry partners, do you have any commercial use cases that deploy to disconnected or air-gapped environments? And the answer predominantly was no. So I think that was a case where there's a requirement that the Navy has that industry does not have. However, I think as part of this process, we were able to influence some of the product roadmaps of some of these companies, and they were actually able to support, I don't want to say modifying, but prioritizing those things on their product roadmap to actually offer, those types of solutions. Mainly I'm talking in the monitoring space, so like Feather AI or Rise. Before they didn't have something that was standalone deployable. It had to be deployed to, some sort of, connected environment. So I think that's one nuance where, we were able to actually influence what industry was doing and made them think like, oh, this is actually something that, a customer might need.
If I could just add on to what Charles just sparked a thought. One of the ways that we've seen that the ways that industries work, especially when it comes to dual-use technologies in this space, there's a lot of those, that the things that industry is built for are not, especially if it's dual-use, are not necessarily the same kind of technology that would find itself in a DDoS environment, like one that's disconnected, that's attacked, that's trying to be that's an EM spectrum that's much more challenging. So when we are thinking about bringing in those new capabilities and trying to offer to industry, here's the environment that you can expect that you have to operate in. We are talking about resiliency in ways that are maybe more complicated than what is just in the normal commercial space. So we're talking not just about like cloud data resiliency. Certainly, yes, we need to do that. We need to be able to have mesh services that allow us to be able to disconnect, reconnect, and transport the information. But we also need resiliency when it comes to IDAM. We need to be able to not just rely on a couple key places that we would be able to do identity management and access control. We have to have that distributed. We need to be resilient when it comes to our network layer. We need to be resilient when it comes to our transport layer. And so it's that level, I think, of thought on what a future fight could look like that we need to ensure that we are highly resilient and redundant in those kinds of environments. That, I think, has been one of the key areas that we are providing some maybe insights to commercial vendors.
I'd like to add a little bit to that too, that industry also needs to anticipate what you guys are looking for, right? We can go and build the best AI, but let's say we deploy thousands of these UAVs out in the fields, all equitable. The enemy's going to get a hands on your AI, right? However well you built it, however well you secured your supply chain, once you deploy it, it's in the field. It'd be nice to then say, well, maybe I need to think about security up front, right, the tools. As you build them in the supply chain perspective, but also post-deployment, because it's going to be in the field, it's going to be captured. In fact, they are going to capture and reverse engineer things. So build that in the front end, right? Those are the things where industry says, I'm going to anticipate not only DDoS, security, things like that, and then kind of say, go back and offer back to the government. So say, I think I know how to fuse a couple of things together, not just AI by itself, but AI with security, AI with DDoS, and things like that.
I think we've got one final question.
Yeah, really, it relates to what you're talking about with OSI stack transport layer, network layer. So a real life example of how important this is. I worked at NAVFAC, with IT security for them, doing a self-audit. I found errors that were blatant and obvious. I wound up leaving NAVFAC and going to the Department of State. The primary reason for that was I couldn't fix their IT security. Because basically, there was an integrity dilemma, right? The command lacked integrity to disclose the vulnerabilities because in the military, at least for me, it's been like the other branches. When you replicate it in-house, you don't want a problem under your watch. So they sweep it under the rug, and the only person you're going to help when you do that are the Russians, Chinese hackers. We know military hackers run 24/7. Everyone. So it may apply to you as well, but you have to, someone said it, right? Trust but verify. You've got to have someone like me to have the freedom to say, hey, we've got a problem here, and it's frightening as a government employee to try and say, hey, the commander, matter of fact, is the problem because you're purposely hiding this stuff. I think as a similar example, similar problem within the Navy ship that caught fire in California, right? They knew there were problems, no one wanted it under their watch, they kept living another way. That said, I hope you guys take the extra effort as we advance in IT security and make sure that we have a chain of command, and the military is good at this. If you're an IT security person and say we've got a problem, you can go up that chain and go, hey, we need to fix something here. I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
I think it's a really interesting and helpful perspective. And I think, at least at the OSD and joint level, with what we are trying to do, the experimentation approach is providing unique value to us, and that we are actively trying to identify failure points, trying to actively identify issues, and being willing to raise those. So we're trying to create a culture, and we've now actually seen the senior leaders asking for that, asking for where are there major issues and blockers. And by moving out in the field and doing experiments, you identify those more readily. And when you're being asked to identify those, you're feeling much more free to be able to identify those. So I think it's a really positive culture that's coming along with the development of JADC2 that's hopefully helping to be able to mitigate some of those things.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on there, as part of the process with, working with these companies, we stood these tools up in an IL2 environment. And then part of the government acceptance testing we did is we actually, scanned these tools for software vulnerabilities. And, my going in assumption was, maybe this is back to the tourism era, right? Because, any sort of industry, piece of software is going to have security beyond reproach. And that wasn't necessarily the case with all of our vendors, which surprised me. But then we work back with them and we say, hey, you need to remediate or, fix these critical vulnerabilities, and they went, yep, we'll do that. And they, prioritize that as part of their workloads, and they fixed them. We're able to, pass those upstream. So I think, security is definitely a concern. If we're going to deploy these tools into DoD networks, we could probably have a rabbit hole into, RMF, but that's tomorrow. But I think, that was interesting to work with them and have them work through some of the security issues.
All right, I think we're out of time. I really appreciate everyone's patience, and Charles said he was going to be here in that corner all day long, so if you have continued questions. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to be here too, so we will continue the dialogue. Just reach out to us, please.
Thank you very much.